Bishop here from Heffernan Insurance Brokers.
And Deborah Costa.
I want to thank Napa Valley Vintners Association for helping us lean in on wildfire mitigation. We have a very, I think, robust program for you today. We have Jess Wills that's come down from Firestorm. He is a private wildfire fighter, and you'll get a lot of fantastic tips on how you're going to be able to do fuel mitigation and a variety of other things that's going to help your property become safer against wildfire. We know that insurance cost is
skyrocketing.
It's really becoming what we call untenable for your profit and loss statements, and we really find it very frustrating right along with you. We know there's been also a constriction in where insurance companies are going to write fire insurance, as well as, generally what type of terms they're going to give to you as a winery. And then you add those two things together with this increase in cost, and something had to change, right, Deb? I mean, we really have to lean in on how to help you better protect your property overall against wildfire.
And communicate your story.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think this is what we're hoping to do today, is help you build a plan so that you can end up giving that plan to your insurance company and help yourself get better insurance. But really, first and foremost, it's to protect life safety for your employees, as well as whoever else may be around the property, your guests, if something happens during the wildfire season, and help you protect your property. So it's the one that stands, and hopefully your neighbors are as well. So we are excited about the program, and we hope you are too.
So let me give you a little background on how I got into this industry and why I do what I do. And so straight out of high school, I took my fire training and became a wildland firefighter. My family, all of my family have been firefighters over the years. And so I kind of just naturally fell into that because that's what my father was doing. My father started the business in '96, and I've been with him now 24 years, traveling the country, fighting fires from here to Tennessee to Florida, Oregon, Washington, all over the West Coast. And our business and my training has been in the forest, working for timber companies, working for large landowners, working for small landowners, single individual homeowners. But I have a real passion for making sure that the natural environment we live in is, one, taken care of, that we're good stewards of the land, that we're treating the land not only with respect, but we need to allow the natural processes to occur to a degree. I mean, we have to live within this environment. We're having to learn to live with fire, and so we're not going to eliminate fire. And so like the fuels mitigation work we're going to talk about, that's living with fire. That's allowing this property to create what it needs to create to have this life here, but it can take that impact of a fire and survive and have the image and the look that you want, but still protect your assets. So I really just have a passion for making sure that landowners are being able to take care of their properties, being able to save them from a large fire, but knowing that we're taking care of the ground, knowing that the habitat, the animals are going to flourish because of what we're doing. And so that's why I'm here today. Okay, let's start this conversation now with the discussion of fire weather. So when we come to a winery and we're assessing what those needs are for fuels mitigation work, we want to make sure we're on the same page as far as understanding how fire is going to impact your property and what causes the fire to impact your property is the weather. Now, we all know, and you guys are very familiar with the incidents the last few years, and those are north wind events. Different geographic areas of the country have, critical fire weather situations. And for this area, the north wind events are a critical fire weather watch, or a situation that, if a fire does start, we're going to have to, take aggressive action, and the agencies are going to take aggressive action to suppress that. Now, when we're looking at fire weather, we're looking at, the atmospheric stability, what's happening in the geographic area, but wind is what pushes the fires the fastest and creates the most, I don't want to say necessarily destruction, but the intensity of the fire is really driven by wind. Now, but there's other factors we have to take into consideration when we're talking about fire weather. There's topography. Where is your winery situated? Is it in a valley? Is it in the valley floor? Is it in a drainage? Is it butted up against a hillside? So you want to look at the topography. Then you want to look at the fuels. What kind of fuel loading? And when we're talking fuels in terms of fire and fire behavior, fuel is your trees, your brush, your grasses. That's the fuel for the fire. And then, so we have topography, fuels, and our weather patterns. It's important to understand how fire burns too, as far as, there's what we have is the fire triangle. Okay, so in order to have fire, you have to have heat, fuel, and oxygen. And so what can we mitigate? What can we take care of out of that triangle? Well, we can't remove oxygen so much on a day-to-day basis. Now, we can smother a fire when we're in the suppression phase, but in terms of fire mitigation work, we have to eliminate the ability for the fire to create heat, and we need to eliminate those fuels. So if a fire doesn't have fuel to burn or have the intensity or the longevity of the heat, then you may still have a fire on your property, but it's not going to be intense. And so our objective is here is in fuels work and creating shaded fuel breaks is to reduce that fuel loading, to reduce one of those sides of that fire triangle, because as soon as you eliminate one of those sides, it collapses. And then that's how we can put the fire out. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the actual implementation of the fuels mitigation plan. So, ideally at this point, we've looked at the fire history of your area. We know the fuel loading. We know what your concerns are. Once those are identified, now we got to implement a plan. How are we going to treat this property? We should have identified the treatment mechanism. Are we treating this mechanically? Are we treating this by manual labor with guys with chainsaws? How are we going to treat it? Okay, we stopped here to look at a perennial drainage that is just a consideration when you're working on your property. Is if you have stream courses or perennial drainages where water will flow, you really should consult with Fish and Game and make sure that you're not impacting any major water course. For timber harvest and working as a licensed timber operator, we have to make sure that we don't operate any equipment in the main stream channel. We can work outside of this with machinery, but we can still come in here and perform work and treat the drainage, but we have to take into consideration shading, erosion control, and making sure we're not going to cause an erosion issue. We definitely take a lighter hand on the land approach when we get into the drainages. Certain drainages we may just have to avoid altogether, but you'll definitely want to consult with your local Fish and Game and Fisheries Department to make sure that you're following their protocols. There are permits and fees that are required, and delineating the stream course and making sure if you are removing trees, that sometimes you have to replace those somewhere else on your property. So just take that into consideration before you just start running machines through a drainage. Phase one is setting the prescription. You need to set the prescription of what you want your fuel to go from the current state to the new state, the desired outcome. So then we set a prescription. A nice general prescription that we've used is, we're going to reduce the fuel, all material from 1 inch in diameter at breast height to up to maybe 6 to 8 inches in diameter of material. I think it's always good to take a light hand on the land approach initially, to come through, make your initial cutting, not to take too much, but be able to finesse that phase to make sure you're maintaining your aesthetics. But we definitely want, what we're trying to create during this mitigation phase is reduce the fuel loading, reduce the fuel continuity. By continuity, I mean you don't want all your trees touching very tightly. You don't want to have walls of brush that are all connected. Let's break that up so the fire can't travel through that rapidly, build up more heat and energy, and cause, crown fires, torching, those situations. So we set the specification of the trees we want to cut. And then the day comes where we line out, we bring our sawyers in, or you bring your machines in, and you're going to start cutting to that specification, taking into consideration, the species you want to retain and your overall objective. So that's step one in the mitigation process. You still have to cut material. You got to see, like right up here, it's a perfect example of the breaking up the continuity of fuel. The manzanita is still there. You still have the structure. It's been pruned, but it's not all connected. So then we're looking down here at an area that hasn't been treated. I would work with the ownership and make sure that, we can address the species of the trees we want to keep, the ones we don't want to keep, and come through here and pull the material up so we can chip it. But when we're creating a fuel break, it's important that you identify why you're creating that. If your main intent is to stop fire, then you're going to have to cut enough material to stop the fire, and balance that between the aesthetics and actually doing what you want to do. So and that's a challenge.
What manpower does it take to
Well, it depends on the topography, really. The fuel loading and topography dictate how we're going to treat this. Now, there's mechanical ways to treat and create a fuel break. There's big machines that are mastication machines or like mulching machines. They grind. So, one guy in a machine can get a couple acres a day grinding brush. In this ground, it's so steep. This time of year, it's really wet. So, you got to look at the factors, and then two, imagine the hillside that we're working right now if we ran big machines on that. What's that going to look like? I personally don't like, I have machines. I've run mastication machines as well, and on the right ground I'll use them, but aesthetically and the impact on the ground, I'd rather use, more labor. So in this situation, we're out here on the main hillsides with 20 folks. So the sawyers come through, they're cutting, we have 10 to 12 sawyers, they're cutting the material. The swampers come behind, pulling the material to where we can get the chipper. And I feel like that's the least impactful on the ground. Okay, step two in the fuels mitigation process, we've implemented the cutting, we've achieved the desired result, and I think there's a good balance that you need to make there between aesthetics, but achieving that fire defensible space dynamic. And I know there might be conflict that arises between the two, but once that's resolved, we move into somewhat of the phase two, and that's going to be the cleanup of the material. What are you going to do with all this material you've cut? You have to physically cut this material and remove it from the site. There's a lot of options for that. You could pull all the material down the hill, load it in dump trucks and haul it off, and those become cost considerations you're going to have to take into account. I think, for a lot of the properties, a lot of the wineries we've been to, they have the ground, they have the property where we can chip the material on site and broadcast those chips back onto the site. That's my preferred treatment versus cutting, piling, and maybe burning. That is an option as well, but then there's considerations there as far as smoke management. So my preferred treatment to get the job done fastest is cutting and chipping. And we're broadcasting the chips back on the site. There's, we don't want to have too many chips in depth, but aesthetically it looks nice. You can cover up a lot of your cuts. It's blowing chips back on to the ground, so you're covering any disturbances you've made. I do get a question a lot of, but you're putting all this fuel back on the ground. But we've changed how the fuel is arranged. So the fuel went from a standing tree and brush to now it's being chipped into small pieces and on the ground. So Can it burn? Yes, it can burn. You know, it'll dry out and eventually it can burn. However, it changes the intensity of the fire. You're not going to have an intense fire in there. It's a fire that you can catch if a fire does approach the property or impact the property. You know, what's also nice is the wood chips, depending on the terrain, can serve to help with erosion. So you know, we're not having to move all that material off site. So from a cost standpoint, it just economically makes the most sense most of the time. But you can only physically get chippers into certain places, and topography play into that. So, you know, we kind of take a look at what's going to be best. And there is no one size fits all approach to a single project. A lot of times, you know, you'll find as a property owner that, you know, on the ridge tops you're using machines to perform the work, and maybe on the steeper slopes you're using manual labor, you know, and using a combination of the treatment types.
All right, Jess, tell us what we're looking at here. What is this section and how are you guys working it?
Okay, yeah, so we're kind of like in phase 2 of our treatment process through this hillside. We set our initial specifications to treat trees and brush up to around 8 inches in diameter. And we've come through, we've made the initial cut. Now we've pulled the material down, and we're in that phase where it's prepped and ready to be chipped. And as the crew comes through here, we'll pull the material into the chipper, broadcast the chips back onto the site, and move on into the final cleanup phase of what we're doing.
I have a question. So how many feet do you guys go up into the canopy just to, you know, make sure that fire doesn't actually catch these trees on fire? Can you explain how that works and how many feet you go up and why this clearance actually works and keeps fire from actually getting to the winery?
Yeah, absolutely. So within that treatment, we're reducing the ladder fuels. So we're getting rid of the smaller brush and trees that allow the fire to go from the ground and the surface up into the canopy. And then the leaf trees, the trees that are the remaining, if there are lower branches, we usually prune those up with a pole saw to about 10 to 12 feet, maybe 15 feet. It just depends on the species of tree too. A lot of these trees, the bay, the live oak, the oak, they don't have a lot of lower branches anyway. So when you look up here, there aren't a bunch of lower branches on the ground. The fire's gonna, if a fire did come onto the property, it's gonna stay in the Duffy leaf litter. It's not gonna climb the trees. If it did climb a tree, it would be isolated, not massive groups and have a crown fire. So, you know, we're keeping the fire on the ground. If it does impinge the property, firefighters and first responders are gonna have the space they need. The intensity of the fire will be so much less that they can stay here and defend the property. They could drive up this road if there was fire on either side without impacting their apparatus or their personal safety. And so, you know, really that's our big intent in all of this, is to not only protect the assets, but allow for the first responders to do their job, gain access, but feel comfortable that they're not going to jeopardize their lives.
Right.
So that's kind of where we're at right here.
Very good. So Jess, can you fill us in here? I think this is like, what, stage 2 or something like that, right? Tell us why this is stage 2, what you've done, and how this really protects the property here and not allowing fire to get to the winery.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, maybe we can back up a little as well. And when Bill reached out to us, we were looking at where's the fire going to come from? What's the fire history in this area look like? This particular ridgeline down in this area hasn't been hit in 65 plus years with a major fire. And, you know, so we're looking at where the fire is going to come from. Has there been fire? And by that, had there been fire previously, then maybe the fuel loading wouldn't have been as great. The fire risk would be lessened. But that's not the case. And so we came out here and met with Bill and assessed the priorities based on ownership's priorities and the intent. Protect the property from fire. We don't want to lose any assets. But then we also want to maintain the aesthetics. And then where are we going to focus that energy? Because it takes a lot of work. When property hasn't been touched for a long time, it takes a lot of physical manpower, labor, to get it to where we want it to be. So then we came through, we identified the priority areas, and we bring the crews in, and then we start the cutting. You know, we utilize a prescription. So we decided, you know, we're not going to take big trees. We're only going to take everything from 1 inch in diameter up to 8 inches in diameter and work through this hillside. One, we don't want to cut too much initially, but two, we're also creating a shaded fuel break. And what we run into is if we take too much material out of the canopy and we get too much sun in, penetrating the ground, we run the risk of having invasive species come in, you know, Scotch broom, for example, or you're going to get more brush species wanting to grow. So we still want to keep the ground shaded, so we don't want to open it up too much. We also want to make sure that we don't cut too much initially, because we can't put those trees back.
That's right.
So we come through with a lighter hand. We worked with Bill to make sure he liked that aesthetic image. From a fireman's perspective and a first responder perspective, we still feel that we're meeting the objective of creating a safe environment for firefighters to come and protect the property, but we're also maintaining the aesthetic value for their clientele, their ownership, and everybody in the valley. So then we came through here, we made the initial cut, we looked at it, we cut some more, we had that dialogue. We bring the material to where we can now process it. You know, everyone's going to have to process this material. How are we going to process it? What's the most cost-effective way? Do we haul it off? For us, and here where they have the property, you know, we chip it back onto the site. We blow the chips back onto the site, and then we kind of will do a final touch-up as we move through the project.
Yeah, good idea.
The final phase of implementing a project is the cleanup. So we've done the initial cut, we've chipped, and now we're going to go through, and what I like to do on the final phase, one is bring the client in, the ownership, make sure that we've achieved the objectives, things are looking good. We do the final, you know, a lot of times we come in and prune up the trees 10 to 15 feet in this phase if we missed anything. We also, you know, from a safety standpoint, we also make sure we cut the stumps flush and as low as possible. You know, we don't want to have any tripping hazards out there on the hillside, because here's what's nice, once you've done this work, you actually may use more of your property. You may want to put in some trails for your clients that come to visit your property. It's amazing how much more you might use your property once you've done this, because I'll tell you, you're going to see more deer, you're going to see more turkeys, you're going to see more wildlife roaming around. One, because now you can see them. They're not hidden behind the wall of brush, and people are going to want to enjoy your property. And you know, so we always try to take an effort to make sure that you cut your stumps low, you nice flush cut them, so you don't have those hazards out there. So in addition to performing actual fuels reduction work on your property, you can also look at, you know, bringing in and utilizing other ways to mitigate fire. And one option that we've been looking at and wineries are implementing is exterior sprinkler systems for protecting your assets. There's a lot of considerations that you need to take into account when trying to implement an exterior suppression system. And I'm gonna preface this with, I don't have a background in irrigation. I don't have a background in moving water unless it's coming out of a fire truck. But what we've been working with folks on is making sure you have a dedicated water source that's unique for fire suppression only. You know, every winery I've been to, you have water sources that are for your facility and operations. I think it's critical though that you have a separate water source and a system that runs independent of anything else. Even if you have a generator at your winery to run your refrigeration or your operation if power goes out, because that happens a lot when there's a fire, you want to make sure that if you're putting in a suppression system, that it's independent of any utilities or any other operation within your organization. And so you want to look at your water source. You know, how many gallons is that? Is that going to meet the need of how much water you need to put on the ground? How are you moving that water? What kind of pumps are you going to use? How are you going to activate those pumps? Are these manually activated? Are you going to have an employee on site? And a big consideration with that is, if you've been evacuated, how are you going to activate that system? So those are the things you're going to have to look at with various vendors on how are you going to turn this system on, depending on those unique situations. I like to plan for the worst case situation where you're not here, you can still turn your system on, you can validate that it's been activated, and make sure things are going well. So anybody that's on a group water system, it's a concern. The fire marshal in this area is concerned about if they're installing sprinklers on the roofs or around the property, that when the fire department does come here, they're not going to have the water they need to help suppress the fire. So, what we've been recommending is, we're in agreement with the fire marshal. We don't want a community or an area to deplete the water source for the greater good. So let's look at what an individual property owner can do. Well, let's find and create a dedicated source then. So you need your own dedicated source. Now that could be a pond. It could be the tanks like we have up the hill here. Now, most of the time that what we're coming across is the water is part of the winemaking process to a degree, right? We have to have water at the facilities. So, what we've recommended is, if we need to add a dedicated tank or create a dedicated water source, whatever that might be, but dedicate that to a suppression system. And I'm talking exterior fire suppression, commercial grade sprinkler systems that are putting out 75 to 80 gallons per minute of water in a 160-foot radius. Putting a lot of water on the ground quickly, being able to activate that in a variety of ways. There's so many options out there now. But really making sure that if your goal is to put water on the ground in the front of a fire, or to increase that humidity, really do a little extra to protect your property, is make sure that's independent of anything else that's going on.
That's right.
How is that pump powered? Okay, is that pump electric? Is it diesel driven? There's a lot of ag options out there. I'm sure you have tons of suppliers in the area. If you're going electric, then maybe you want to run that off of a dedicated generator that's capable of running the volume you need. And you need to run the hydraulic calculations and make sure you have the flow you need, but running that pump off a dedicated system. Diesel, there's a lot of options for portable diesel pumps that can be activated remotely, and they're independent of any other utility infrastructure. And that's what we're looking at. A lot of the wineries do have generators, but those are for their cooling, right? You don't want to lose your inventory. So, invest in a completely dedicated system. There's a variety of sprinkler type heads. There's a variety of ways to do it. I think there is no perfect solution for any one property. You just have to look at the dynamics and the needs of each property.
Right. You had been talking about with us previously about a 10,000 gallon, let's say, system.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's say that a winery owner is experiencing an approaching fire. How do they engage with that? Like, what would be your recommendation in terms of them, like fire's coming, and now they are able to actually engage that system? How would you stage that?
Yeah, first I would say, okay, make sure you're listening to, the fire authority that's coming through. If they're asking you to evacuate. Hopefully at some point, I would recommend that as we get closer into fire season, have your property prepared, on the onset of fire season. So you're ready to leave, and talk with your kids about what the plan is, talk with your workers. Here's the plan. Create a plan for your workforce to say, okay, if we get evacuated, this is what we're doing. And maybe we take a few minutes and we harden the property, and then depending on, like, if you're talking a fire suppression system, how are we going to activate that? When do we activate it? I would say, you're going to activate it when you leave. Worst case scenario, you've saturated the ground and the perimeter around your property. You've increased that humidity. A fire does impact it. Unless it's completely dried out, it's still going to be effective. Now, if there's a way you can activate it remotely and verify that it's come on, yeah, I don't want to say you want to wait till the last minute, but you want to wait until you're going to saturate your ground cover. and it'll still be, have that moisture that you need when the fire does hit it. So it's a balance. I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think if it was my property, if this was my property, I would have it set up where I can remote activate my system, ideally all of it at once, minimizing valves, and I would have a system where I could visually see through a camera system or be able to visually see that those have come on, and I would wait till probably within an hour of the fire impacting the property.
And how many gallons of water would you have dedicated for that?
At a minimum, I'm thinking, it depends on how many heads and what kind of property we're wanting to protect. If it's a single family residence or a large winery, at a minimum, probably 10,000 gallons. A lot of the systems we've kind of looked at, we would use 10,000 gallons over a period of, a couple hours. Because you don't have to run the system continuously. You run it for so many revolutions, and you would do a test run on the onset of fire season. You do a test to achieve the result you want as far as the amount of water on the ground, and then you just learn your timing, and then shut the system off. Now obviously if the winds are blowing, it's 110 degrees, it's going to evaporate. So then, do some other tests on hot days, like, okay, we're going to run the system for 10 minutes, and then we're going to let it sit 45, and then we'll activate it again for another 10 minutes. And then maybe your system can refill within that time frame if you have that capability. But if you're coming off of a well, it takes a while to refill 10,000 gallons at 30 gallons per minute. Okay, so now we're going to move into talking about hardening your assets and structures on your property and what that means. So far, we've talked about the exterior, your defensible space on the outlying areas of your property, or most likely from the 10-foot to 100-foot area around your properties. Now we want to talk about some basics that will really make a big difference in saving your structures if they're impacted by fire. And so we call that fire, hardening your assets. You want to focus on that first 0 to 10 feet around your home or your winery. Any structure you have on your property you don't want to lose. Let's focus on that, and you really don't want to have much vegetation within that 10 feet. You don't want to have bark up against the structure or anything that's flammable. Look at changing out some of your landscaping to, from bark to maybe, some type of river rock or decomposed granite, or just look at some other options, maybe more pavers. I think you can still maintain your aesthetics, but being able to have that first from 0 to 10 feet around your home really clean, clear of debris is great. One thing you could do too is, a lot of folks have plants right up against the houses. Put them in a planter or a pot. And during the winter, you can have them right there against your house. In the summer, you move them away a little bit. So what you want to look at around your structures, you're going to start from the top down. If you have a chimney, is that screened? Can embers get in there? Vents or eave vents, make sure you have screens on those. Make sure that you check your windows. If you are evacuated, make sure your windows are closed, your doors are shut. But focus on having dual pane windows. A lot of older homes are single pane. The dual pane can take a lot of radiant heat, and they won't break. As soon as a window breaks or a door's left open, then you have ember wash coming into your residence, and then it's just a matter of time before it would catch. So work your way down: doors, eaves, fences. A lot of homes, a lot of buildings, you build that nice wood fence all the way up to where it's anchored to the corner of your building. Let's try to come up with a different plan there. Maybe use a different material up to the building, go with steel. But what happens is those fences start to burn, and they burn all the way down to the corner of your house, and then it catches your house on fire. Same with the decking. What we notice, there's a lot of nice decks, but then no one cleans underneath them, or they're not closed off. And I forgot to talk about the gutters. Same thing. Make sure you have an annual maintenance plan to go around your property, starting on the roof down, getting the roof clearance you need from trees, clean the gutters, check your vents. Something I deal with in my neck of the woods, woodpeckers. These darn things peck massive holes into my eaves go up there and patch those, replace them. Maybe you put steel up. But work your way through the property and really look at the little things, because it's the little things that burn your property, that will cause a property to catch on fire. You don't want to lose an asset because you didn't clean out the gutters, or you left some bark or a fence. It'd be a real shame on something that's very easy to mitigate. I'm up here at a structure on the property, and we've looked at the fuels work outside of the area of structures or other assets, getting further into the fuels reduction, but we need to bring it back and take a look at what folks need to do around the structures themselves, and do what procedures or what things to look at to make sure your home is fire hardened to take not necessarily direct flame impingement, but have a fire and embers impact the home. We want to look at what folks can do, or what a lot of folks I come across that are doing that really put your asset at risk. What I come across a lot lately is the bark. I come to a house, it's beautiful, we got nice sidewalks, and then they have bark all the way up to the wood siding. And so, what happens is the initial fire blows through, the house might be fine, but then you have a ground fire that creeps through that bark, it gets up underneath and up to the siding, and over time, if no one's up here for 24 hours while the fire's burning, all of a sudden your house catches on fire because you have bark that was touching the siding. So, the state really wants us to focus on that first 5 to 10 feet. Look at changing the materials around your flower beds from bark to, maybe do a nice gravel or a decomposed granite or just mineral soil, and just look at making sure you don't have things touching your home that are going to be flammable. You want to look at keeping your gutters clean. Make sure that, annually as we get into fire season, clean off the roofs, clean the gutters, check your eave vents, the chimneys. Make sure that anywhere embers and wind and smoke's going to blow into the structure through the eaves. You want to make sure you have like 1/16, or I think 1 1/16 to 1 1/4 inch wire on all your vents. Smaller the better. You want to get the vegetation off of the siding. Make sure you get as much clearance as you can around the trees, so you don't have trees that are right on the house, touching, the house. And then you work your way out, focusing on, the fuels around it. You can still have nice landscaping, especially if it's irrigated, but I saw a lot of hedges burn up. Now this one, you're probably fine, it's by itself. But if it's in connection with the wildland or further up the hill, create a separation. Create some breaks in your vegetation so it doesn't burn through that whole windrow or hedgerow to your house. Same with fences. We run across that with decks and fences. A fence line runs and butts right up to the corner of the house. That fence catches on fire, it runs all the way across, catches the house on fire. So really want to, when you're preparing for fire season, look at those little details, the mats, the rugs on the back patio furniture. A lot of the high winds that you're experiencing, they're going to blow over furniture potentially. Is that going to break a window? If that window breaks open or something is left open, all those embers are coming in the house. So when you do evacuate and you do leave, make sure you close the house up tight. If you have time, move patio furniture, get that away from the house. Same with firewood. Just take those precautions as you move into fire season to really take a look at the small details, because that's what burns down 90% of the structures. Is not direct flame impingement from the initial fire. It's fire creeping through the bark. No one's there to put it out. Next thing you know, your house catches on fire. So look at the small details. Focus on those first, and then work your way out from there. Okay, so the reason I stopped here was I wanted to show an example of, a topic that comes up a lot, and it's especially when we're dealing with multiple owners or husband-wife conflict is, when we're talking about this fuels work, for some reason, I think the public believe we're clear cutting. We're going to clear cut this area. And so this was just a good example of where we wanted to make sure the owners felt like they still had their privacy, but we were able to achieve that fire mitigation side and achieve the fuels reduction we need. So right back behind here, behind these bushes, is treated property just like the other areas we've seen today. But from your front porch while you're having your cup of coffee, you'll never know we were there, but it'll still serve its purpose. There's a good fuel break back behind there, but you're still able to maintain your aesthetics. You'll also still be able to maintain your marriage when we're done. I've been out to a lot of properties, and what I come across a lot, and it's kind of one of the small things, kind of around the house, similar concept, but it can be out in your, in your vineyards even, is making sure that you harden your irrigation system if anything's above the ground. So in this situation here, we have PVC that's coming from the water source, going down to the winery, and it's above ground. Now this is a temporary fix, but we don't want that to be here come fire season. Because what's going to happen is a fire comes through here and it backs down through here and it melts these pipes, and PVC will catch on fire fairly easily. And then, now you've lost your water source. So you've done all this work down there and now you have no water. So I think it's just critical, if you're putting in water lines, make sure they go under. Anything that's above ground is galvanized or stainless or some form of metal, something that's non-combustible. Anything, and then any PVC or combustible product, put it in the ground, bury it. But we came across that a lot where, someone runs over to the hose bib to put out a fire, and there's no water because, a half a mile up the property, up the road, now the water's just had flown out. So the state does require a 100-foot clearance around your property. And if you go to the state CAL FIRE's website, they have a lot of great information with pamphlets on that show what they really mean by that. And so they want to have you have treated, they really don't want much vegetation within that first 5 to 10 feet. They don't want vegetation up against the house.
Right here, for instance, in an ideal world, these bushes would not be.
Yeah, we would move those out. Let's move those out 10 feet. We could do something a little different. Maybe do something that you can move, something in pots, and then come fire season, you move it out. But get that first 5 to 10 feet away from the house. Now, the other, 75 to 100 feet as we move out, you can still have trees, but let's get them thinned. So maybe your spacing between the trees is 20 to 25 feet ideally. Raise up the lower branches. Like here, this is perfect. They have the clearance, they have defensible space, and by that, a firefighter could come up here, run a hose lay, and attack a spot fire in here safely. I wouldn't feel uncomfortable being behind this house if a fire was backing down this hill. There's space, the canopy's raised, I can see what's going on. We're also looking at the continuity of fuels. The fuels, like these bushes back here, the little manzanita, they're separated. They're not all together in a big row, in a big bunch. So the fire is not going to burn through that aggressively. It might creep around, but it's not going to be an intense fire. And so this has defensible space. It's irrigated, so there's irrigation here. They've done a lot. It's raked. I can tell it's been raked. It's been blown. It's clean, there's not a lot of debris or, stuff that you hide in the back shed up against the house. So I feel there's good defensible space here. I don't think there's a whole lot more they would really have to do to make it safe. In the perfect world, maybe we would take out a few more of these fir trees, but if it was my property, I wouldn't. I think if the fire chief came up here and saw this, he would go, yeah. He's more concerned with what we're doing up the hill, getting where the intense fire is going to be. Right. This isn't going to be intense in here. A fire engine and their firefighters should be able to handle this no problem. Right. Okay, so we've talked about mitigating the outside of your property with the fuels reduction, hardening your assets. We've talked about, having additional options as far as like sprinkler systems and water sources. Now, one thing I want to talk about is you're an industrial operation. You're growing grapes. There's a lot of activity. There's machinery involved. You have tractors and mowers and weed eaters. You have all sorts of equipment that's working throughout the year to do what you need to do. And I think it's important that you as owners have a plan in place to make sure that your staff and your contractors aren't going to start a fire while working on your property that can spread to the wildland. And in California, you're an industrial operation, and if you are operating and performing an industrial operation where if a fire starts and it can spread to the wildland, you can be liable for those damages. And the last thing you want to do is have individuals out mowing your in between your row crop on a red flag day, and you start a fire. You cannot have that happen. I mean, it would be it could ruin your business, your reputation, it'd ruin your neighborhood. It would be awful. And so I think it's important that you come up with a fire plan. So all your staff that are out there running around, have fire extinguishers on your UTV, have shovels, have a water can, and train your staff so if they do start a fire, they know what to do. And check the weather as we get into fire season and make sure that your staff know, like, hey, maybe today's not the day that we need to mow this back 40 that's up against the hillside. Look at fire weather, take those precautions, because the last thing you want to have happen is have your staff start a fire, and then you have to deal with those consequences. Okay, so let's talk just a minute about the unfortunate event where a fire does come through your property, you are impacted, and you have to deal with the aftermath. Now, I'm hoping after you watch this, I'm hoping that you've done mitigation work around your facility and you're going to come back to something that's worth coming back to. And so there's a lot of hazards. I just want to address a few really quick when it comes time to come back into that fire area. And CAL FIRE and the authorities are really good about making sure the roadways are safe, but your property is your responsibility, and there's a lot of hazards for you and your employees when you come back onto the site. And in this environment, the biggest safety threats I see are trees that have been burned out. So you really need to send through somebody that has a skilled eye to inspect your trees to see if they've taken serious damage. Are they structurally sound? Do you need to, you may have trees that have what are called cat faces, where the fire's burned up into them, that you may need to have these taken down, because fire, the fire really impacts the trees and the stability on how they sit in the ground. And a lot of trees come down, and you don't want to send your employees back in too soon and have trees coming down and could potentially harm them. The other thing we come across is stump holes. So a lot of this ground at one point, back in the early 1900s was logged. And so you're going to have old stumps that have been burning for, ever how many days, maybe a week. And a lot of times they're very unassuming, like you would hardly notice there was a stump there. But, we've come across situations where if you fell in that stump hole and it's still 1200 degrees, you could have employees seriously burned or injured. And that would be an unfortunate event. So you're looking out for burned out stumps, your trees. The other thing we come across, especially in this environment that's agricultural, is the plastic culverts. A lot of times those burn out. But what happens is a lot of times if they're buried deep enough, they burn out, but the soil on top or the roadbed on top hasn't collapsed yet. And so what happens is you can fall into those as well. So I think in general, those are three main areas that I see, but you're going to really want to make sure you have someone within your organization go out and inspect your property thoroughly before you let your workers back on to the site to start cleaning up, because there are still a lot of hazards days, weeks, and even months after a fire.
you know, a lot of winery owners might be wondering, is it worth the investment?
Yeah.
I think
Everybody's asking that question.
That's a great question to ask.
Right.
And I think, you know, I would have probably been a little bit more reticent to maybe take a harder look at the project or the Jess or the team or whatever, but I had I had an unofficial white paper in the form of the glass fire.
Yeah, right.
Which, you know, the client that Jess helped during the glass fire, I mean, the proof was in the work that was done, right?
That's right.
So that work was done in January. The glass fire happened in September, and that property is still there and doesn't look like fire ever touched it.
Yeah, great
So I
job,
think-
by the way.
It looks beautiful.
So
Yeah.
so we sort of have an unofficial white paper already on this. That,
Yeah.
that when you do the work and you invest in it,
It works.
it works.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's what the agencies are looking for. CAL FIRE, or the
Right.
local fire protection districts. You know, the Hillsburg chief was out. You know, they want to see this work done.
That's
And-
right.
And they know that when they come to this property, they can put an engine here or several engines. Their firefighters are going to be safe, and they're going to do good. You know, they're going to be, those resources will be used to actually do good.
That's right.
And they're going to feel comfortable coming here to help protect your property versus not doing anything, having trees growing over your assets. They're not going to stay.
That's right.
It's a lost cause. They're going to go to the next property
That's done this work.
that's done the work.
Yeah.
Because this is a win. They're going to save this, and at least they're going to save something on the road.
Right.
And it's a triage situation when you run into these massive fires. There's not enough resources to go around. There is a triage that takes place. They can only help so many people. And I think as a steward of the land, if you own land, it's part of your responsibility for forest health and being a good steward to take care of your land too.
That's
And
right.
so it all kind of ties
And to
together.
protect your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.